Yeah, so thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk. Today I'm going to talk about what is a personal project. In spite of having worked with artists for a lot of years, this is a project grounded very much in my own practice and experience. And I'm going to talk about something much more important than the Internet of Things. I'm going to talk about the Internet of Guitars. Now, if you're a guitar aficionado in the audience, then I hope you're going to enjoy a bit of talk about guitars. If you're not, it's unlikely, but if you're not, then at some stage in the talk, I do plan to say something of more general relevance to the Internet of Things and see if you can spot it. But anyway, let's get on with guitars. So I'll start with a question for the audience. I would normally do a shout out in the room at this point. Feel free to type your answers. It's a simple question. Who is this? Is the question. And I won't let too long a pause sit as we might do in a live room. I'll give you the answer pretty much straight away. This is Trigger. And Trigger is Willie Nelson's guitar. I think he still plays it, it's still functional. But as you can see, it's extremely battered. Trigger has led a very long life. It is, in spite of its appearance, an extraordinarily valuable guitar. And I guess the reasons for that are obvious. Think of the stories that Trigger can tell. Trigger is a guitar, I guess, that has accidentally acquired a very recognizable identity. Who is this? The answer is, I don't know exactly. This is a brand new guitar. It's a Fender custom shop edition reissue of a 1954 Strat, but it was made only recently. And the point about this guitar is that somebody has paid an extra $1,000 to have it deliberately distressed in the factory. It's been beaten up when made to look as if it was a relic. It's a process called relicking. It's actually beaten up according to the persona of a possible player. So there's an imagined story about the damage that it's had. You can buy other versions of relic guitars. One version is where it's as if it's never been played, but it's just aged for 40 years. So it's kind of brand new, but it's also, and the paintwork is sort of faded and other things. So this guitar, I can't identify it as a unique one, but someone has made an attempt to give it an identity from the very beginning. And that's such an important thing that some people are willing to spend thousands of bucks on doing that. Now, it's a very controversial practice. Many people say it's a fake, inauthentic, you name it, but there's definitely a market for this kind of thing. So those questions about the identity of a physical object, a guitar, really appealed to me. They got me thinking about the identities of things in general. And so as part of my Dream Fellowship, I embarked on a sort of practice project. And it was to create a guitar that would both have an identity from the outset that I would make, but also would acquire an identity throughout its lifetime. So somewhere between the relic and Trigger that we saw. And it would do this using digital technologies. And this is the guitar. It's called the Carillon guitar. From the outset, as you can see, we gave it a very unusual design. It has this crazy Celtic knotwork over it, and it has a backstory. It's inspired by the Irish bard Turlough O'Carolan, who travelled around Ireland composing tunes, but also collecting and telling stories. That's what bards do. And the backstory of the guitar is it's meant to be a bard. It's meant to travel around the world telling stories and capturing them as it goes. The physical manifestation of the guitar is just one half of what it is. The other half is digital media, in particular its blog, and you spend as much time poking around there as you like. I think we're up to 104 posts now over 8 years of life. And its blog is essentially an attempt to capture the whole of its life story in as much detail as possible, from its first conception and design through to its birth in the luthier's workshop, through to meeting other players and performing and going to recording studios, through to research papers, through to random thoughts about guitars. It's a guitar's history, recorded mostly on video and written in as much as possible. The novel-ish digital technology is used to connect those two things. So the physical guitar is connected to its blog in the sense that if you take a mobile device like a phone or a tablet and you point it at the Celtic knotwork, then the knotwork is red, it's a visual marker, and it takes you to some of the stories from the website. So you can scan the guitar with a mobile device and it will tell you up to 6 things about its story and where it's been. So that's the novel digital bit. I won't get too much into the technology that does it. That would be another talk. I'm sure you're aware in this audience that there's a whole variety of visual marker technologies out there, from barcodes and QR codes that have been around for decades, through to all sorts of flavors of augmented reality markers and all sorts of stuff. These days, there's a number of techniques that allow you to visually recognize stuff. The one that we've been working with is quite interesting because the way you create a marker is you essentially write numbers, well, you draw numbers, that's what I should have said. So there's a set of rules that embed readable codes into the topology of drawings. If you look at this insect design here, it's actually representing a 5-digit number, and it's fairly obvious how it does it. If you look at each of the wing segments, you can see there's a number of solid blobs in there. So I can read 1, 2, 4, 4. The central body is also part of the code, and there's actually 1 solid blob. So all I've done there is I've written down the number 1, 1, 2, 4, 4 in a sort of drawing form. If you give this to graphic designers, they love it, and they come up with all sorts of crazy stuff. So here's a design book we made where we gave graphic designers these rules, and they got really creative about embedding them into different visual designs. These quite different brands actually all map to the same underlying codes. And that's a real weirdness of art codes that we'll come back to later. It's not that each image is a unique thing. Well, that's not quite it. No, it's not that each code has got a unique image. I'm sorry, each code can have very many images, and that allows you to disguise and hide the addresses in all sorts of playful ways. And even I can't figure out exactly how Carolyn's knotwork actually works today. People say to me, show me where the codes are, and I'm still at a loss, and I've been looking at it for 8 years. Anyway, that's not the point of the talk. The point of the talk is to get thinking about the identity of this object. So once it was made, Carolyn started its life as, I suppose, methodologically, what I would call a Turing technology probe. The idea of a technology probe has been in the HCI literature for quite a long time. You release the technology into the world at a sufficient state of readiness that you can really learn things about it in the wild. And Carolyn toured. That was its way of working. We passed it around as many people as we could. So some of the contexts and things that we looked at were obviously making. I think the first 17 posts are all concerned with choosing the woods and planing the woods and assembling the guitar. Performing. So here's an image of Tim Eady, who's a well-known folk guitarist, fantastic player, with Carolyn on stage. He talked a bit about it, played some tunes. People hosted it in their homes. These tended to be more everyday guitarists. It was a resident at the local folk club, for example, and it was just passed around people, and they would spend several weeks with it. Typically, they would record bits of their repertoires or tell us stories about their first guitars or how they learned to play. It had to be repaired several times for various reasons, and we've got extreme documentation of it being taken to bits and put back together again and so on. There's been a few recording sessions. It appeared on an album. We took it to some good studios, and they spent a long time trying to get the best possible sound out of it and told us how they did it. It even went on the road at one point, and we put some sensors inside it, some accelerometers and temperature and light sensors, and we saw just how hot it got when we left it in the boot of a car for several hours, and we realized that we'll never ever leave a guitar in the boot of a car again, because it's extremely stressful on the object. So those were just a few vignettes of this object's life that are kind of documented in its blog. I thought I might just show a couple of video clips. I could spend hours. It would be, yeah, eat up all the time. But I've just got two examples from its history. So the first is a video clip from the making of the guitar. This is the kind of information you don't usually get when you buy a guitar, but boy, I wish you did as routine. This is it being made in the factory. This is the moment where we laser etch the soundboard. It's a piece of expensive spruce wood and it's a one-shot deal. Get this wrong and you're in serious trouble. I guess it's just the level of insane documentation tried to capture about this product. So we've got a camera fixed amazing. Obviously, every product line is terrible. Some story about how it happens to that moment. Yeah, that'll probably do for that one. You can watch the rest online. And here's another moment. This is the guitar being played. It seems right we should hear it, and I'm not the person to play to you right now. So this is Remy Harris, who's a bit of a jazz guitarist, up and coming figure in the jazz world, who dropped by, spent a bit of time playing it and giving us some thoughts. Don't know how the sound will come across online, but I'll
just play on I'll improvise on an Egyptian jazz tune. It's called Coquette. It's an old swing song.
and so on. And we should listen to that really for the rest of the session, but take a look at the blog anyway. One other thing that happened as Carolyn spread around, as we started to make some physical mementos and proxies. So when it had left people, I mean, they could have just gone to its blog and kept up with it, but somehow it felt right to leave them with a scannable physical token that had been there. So we made a bunch of stickers and plectrums and button badges and general sort of merch for the product, and we would leave that behind with people. And then we also got some interesting requests. So the image on the right is Patrick, and Patrick was doing up a battered old acoustic guitar he had at the time. He's a bit of a modder, gets old stuff and hacks it around and remakes it. And he said, would we decorate his guitar with the same interactive patterns that would connect to Carolyn's blog? So we've etched them into the headstock, and we've made a kind of special pick guard there. So, you know, the patterns, the interactive bits started to be applied to other physical things. Okay, I could talk about guitars for a lot longer, and probably a better talk would be just to watch a few more videos of Remy Harris and Tim Eady and all sorts of other folks. But I did make a promise that I would try and generalize this beyond my personal obsession. So what's going on here? Well, I think it's about the importance of everyday things or products that we choose to engage with having identities. That's what's going on here. It's all about giving identities to products or letting identities emerge, or some combination of the two. Why? Why are identities important? Well, I think there are lots of reasons. Just to highlight three. Number one, pretty obvious to most people, I would hope, is provenance. If you buy a thing or sell a thing, or if the police turn up at your doorstep, you might need to prove it's yours and prove it is what you say it is. So going back to its history, it's looking at all the changes that have happened to it. Is it still the same Carolyn guitar if it's been repaired and replaced and so on? Actually, there are interesting, more contemporary reasons for provenance on products like guitars. At the moment, I don't know if you know this, if you own a vintage guitar that is made from an endangered wood species, according to the CITES legislation, then there's a serious risk it will be confiscated if you carry it across an international border, for example, if you're a professional musician. And your guitar really should have a guitar passport with it. And there are proposals for guitar passport themes. So objects have to carry passports too, otherwise they're at risk of being confiscated and destroyed as if they were bits of ivory or something. Secondly, the identity enhances the utility of the object. You can get more out of it. Guitars don't usually come with user guides, at least not very big ones. They may a bit if they've got some onboard electronics like a tuner or a preamp or something like that. But by and large, they don't. But Carolyn does. We built up a long user guide for Carolyn. And in that user guide are things like how to record it. So you'll find a section saying at Real World Studios, they made it sound like this. And here's how they did it. They used these mics, they positioned them here, they had these settings on the digital audio workstation and the mixing desk, and so on. So the idea is if you bought a guitar like that and you wanted to know how to get the best sound out of it when recording it, then that information would gradually build up through practice among the community in its user guide. So the user guide becomes a kind of living thing. Much more important, though, I think the most important thing that's going on here is it's about personal meaning, isn't it? I mean, that's why Fender are relicking their guitars, because that enables at least some of their customers to make a meaningful personal connection to the instrument. You imagine your connection to a 1954 Fender, and it says something about your identity and who you're trying to portray yourself as a musician. Whereas the people who had Carolyn at home and were recording their songs and talking about how their mums and dads had taught them to play and bought them their first guitars, they were also making some kind of personal, meaningful connection to this object. They were writing themselves into its history. So let's talk a bit more then, if we all agree that identities are important for products and things, is how they come into being, how are they forged? So at any moment in time, Carolyn's identity arises from a mapping between its physical form, the 6 points of interaction, and its blog, stories it can tell. We very quickly learned that we had to keep making new mappings wherever it went. So every time we introduced it to a new person, we lent it to you, we would set it up to have a meaningful story. We'd pick on some things in its existing history that we thought would connect to you. If you were a jazz fan, we thought, then there'd be a link to Remy Harris playing it. So you immediately got that, okay, that's great, Remy's played this instrument. We soon realized that the mappings actually had to be changed for each context the guitar went to. So if I take it to the folk club on a Wednesday night, I want it to tell stories about things that have happened at the folk club. What songs were played there in the past, 5, 10 years ago? What memories do I have? If I take it on stage, I want it to perform some different stuff. If I'm practicing at home, I want it to let me bring back my practice videos so I can quickly play along. So the mappings that define its identity, how it tells its story at any moment, are constantly changing. They're being remade all the time. And that's not only down to us as manufacturers, but it's also down to the people who own it. They should be able to change the mapping. And one of the nice things that the ArtCodes app lets you do is exactly that. So in ArtCodes, when you scan something and it gives you an experience, you can then open up that experience and remap it and give it another name and share it with someone else. So in the world of ArtCodes, you don't just scan a product and go to a web page. You choose to have an experience, and then you can remake that and pass it on to someone else. So in this world, the mapping between physical and digital is, if you like, a first-class part of the experience, something that's exposed and open to being messed around with. And it's not only a digital mapping, it's also a physical reappropriation. That's what's going on with the mementos and things like that. So another way to create a new mapping is to leave the digital side the same, but to make new physical things, to put Carolyn's decorations on a t-shirt or a record label or a poster on the wall or another guitar or whatever it happens to be. All of this, I suppose, describes a bit of a kind of picture of co-creation. That's what's going on here, is that the manufacturers and the consumers are collectively sharing and remapping the product. We've long debated whether some of the points of interaction should be fixed and only some should be remappable, but I don't think we've ever come to an answer to that question. Another thing that's going on here is about sharing identities. So Carolyn points towards the idea of having social brands, where a product identity spreads across all of the instances of a brand and somehow connects them up in interesting new ways. Now, actually, this kind of happens already in the guitar world. So the image on the left is of Tash Sultana, the Australian multi-instrumentalist. She's great. If you haven't heard her playing, go look it up. She has a Fender Signature Edition guitar. And Signature Edition guitars are long-standing practice in the guitar industry. You get a trendy player to help design the instrument. Sometimes it's quite a foundational design, sometimes it's a cosmetic design, but either way, they produce their signature guitar and they put their signature on it, and then you sell that. And a bit like relicking, it's clearly an attempt to imbue the instrument with identity from the outset. In this case, somehow when you buy that guitar, you're connecting to the identity of Tash Sultana. If you look on the internet, there are now various videos of people playing the Tash Sultana Fender celebrity endorsed guitar, telling stories about it, reviewing it mostly, but I guess as it goes out there into the world, there will be everyday consumers who are also telling their stories. And the question is, how should those all connect up? If I choose to go and buy Tash's guitar, or my instance of it, then surely when I scan it, I should get Tash's stories. If she's done something interesting with her guitar, somehow I should pick that up through mine. Would she ever notice anything I've done with my guitar? I don't know. Or would other members of the community do that? This implies that when technologies, tagging technologies like visual markers, by the way, they should operate at the instance level as well as the brand level. And I think that's an interesting kind of technical implication, that each product should somehow be individually recognizable while also being recognizable as part of the common brand. Oh, and a question we haven't figured out yet is what happens at transitions of ownership? What happens if I buy and sell Carolyn or a Tash Sultana guitar? Do I have to pass my history on with it? Is it now part of the product? Is that part of the deal? Or can I withhold it? Do I still keep access to that history, even though the physical object has moved on? Or I think a really nice idea, could I keep in touch with it in the future? I've occasionally wondered about guitars that I have passed on, not many. What's happened to them? And I'd kind of like to know, actually, who's played them and where they've been. What about houses I've sold or cars that I've passed on? What happened to those things? Here's a little aside about art codes again, just back to that particular technology. This kind of thinking inspired us to come up with a way of algorithmically producing art codes. So we took different seeds of the designs that had been made by humans, and then our algorithm combines all the parts to automatically generate lots more art codes. So this hopefully beautiful wallpaper you can see, this is art code wallpaper. Each of those panels is interactive. You can scan it and it'll tell you some kind of story. And we can make up to, I think it's 2,000 panels of wallpaper, each of which is individually recognized, but actually where they all look the same to a human. So we've got a lot of control, if you like, over that visual design space. You know, they appear to be separate markers, but at another level, they are obviously the same brand. Anyway, time presses. The final thing I'd like to talk about is performing identities. So the thing about a musical instrument is you perform with it. It may be a staged performance with an audience. It may be a jam with friends. It may just be practicing at home. But when you use it, it's meant to feel performative. You're meant to have a state of flow or sort of pleasure. It's a physical experience. And one of the things that I never liked about this Carillon project is the idea that I have to take my guitar, oh, here it is, crunch, just broke it, and take my camera and somehow do this weird scanning thing. That was always the model, was that the camera was in the hand, and that's not very performative. So recently I created a small performance for a local audience where I went on stage with the guitar and I played it and talked a bit about it, played some videos, played along to some videos. And I just tried a very simple thing. I flipped the relationship around. So I had a fixed camera on stage, and that allowed me to sort of play the instrument and then naturally turn it. It's not that natural, but it's not too bad. Turn it, show it to the audience and the camera, and start to bring up bits of information in a slightly more natural, to me, way. I had to sort out several things about lighting and reliability, but kind of felt good. And it tied in with some other research that we've done in the lab about interacting with physical things recently. So Juan Martinez Alvia, our student, PhD student, did an ethnographic study of musicians in which he noted a problem of encumbered interactions. So here's a bass player. He's a very skilled musician. He's semi-pro, plays in lots of bands, and he has to learn weekly new pieces of music very quickly. And like lots of people, he goes to the internet to do that. He looks them up on YouTube. And then he spends a huge amount of time in this really weird two-handed practice that you can see in the image. The right hand is using the mouse and the keyboard, trying to search for and load up YouTube videos and scroll and scrub through them. The left hand is playing his bass by tapping the strings. And he does these simultaneously. So he'll be scrolling video and tapping the strings. Now, the fact he's learned to do that suggests there may not be a problem here. Can't anyone? But the truth is, it's pretty tricky, actually. And he spends a lot of time frustratedly going through the videos. Obvious, but it's hard to conjure up all this digital stuff when you're then trying to perform with a physical object. So the last part of the story is to talk about some other ways that we've tried to address this with guitars, but not with the Carillon guitar. And we've engaged in something called Soma Design, or somasthetic design, and it's becoming quite the thing in HCI at the moment. So somasthetic design is, well, firstly, it comes from something called somasthetic philosophy, which is a branch of philosophy that is about mind-body integration, a holistic view of the mind-body. It tries to get you to understand your bodily experience from a new perspective and to rethink it. And it's very much concerned with aesthetics, the feeling and the appearance of bodily interaction. And Soma design has been applied in HCI to designing physical interactions. The method involves several things. You tend to do exercises in a group that are about getting familiar with your body in new ways. Lots of laying down in the floor on the dark, in the dark, getting in touch with yourself. They also have this thing called Soma Bits, which is a kit. You can see it on the left there, which is intended to help defamiliarize your bodily experience of products. It's a bunch of inflatable, vibratable, and heatable soft actuators, a little bit of a kind of soft robotics kit, and it's designed to be placed in and around the body so as to draw your attention to what you're doing when you're interacting with something. So in the image on the right, for example, there's Juan. He's playing the guitar in part of a Soma Design session. He's standing on a wobbly inflatable cushion that can vibrate, and he's wearing a guitar strap that's made out of a bit of elastic that moves very flexibly compared to a normal guitar strap. He's moving with the instrument, occasionally talking about what he's doing, and I'm improvising a response on the laptop. So it's like a Wizard of Oz thing. It allows him to sort of perform what his body might want to do with this unusual guitar, and then I make music or sound in response. So anyway, we ran a bunch of sessions like this, and we came up with a few ideas. I'm not sure if they're good ideas or not, but they are ideas, and they are ideas that we wouldn't have thought of without doing Soma Design. So one is the stretchy guitar strap. Got it here somewhere. And it is, as it says on the tin, it's a guitar strap you wear. It has some stretchy bits with some inwoven stretch sensors in the fabric. You can just about see them there. Has a little bit of electronics. I think it's a Baylor board. And when I stretch with my body, I can do things like control video, scrub through it, or control sound. And actually, it's an amazingly performative thing. It feels flowful to use my posture. It's not overloading my fingers, which are already busy playing the guitar. It actually allows me to express myself in some fairly cheesy ways in terms of my attempts to dance when I play. An even weirder concept was this breathing guitar that we made a pre-prototype of. So here we've strapped a bunch of inflatable Soma bits to a guitar. And what this instrument does is it can inflate, it can breathe against your body. Why is that interesting? Many musicians need to learn to breathe, not just people who play wind instruments, because breathing is about relaxation and dealing with tension and performance nerves, among other things. So this guitar is able to engage with your breathing. For example, it can gently press back at you to remind you to breathe every now and then and to relax. It can do other weird things. It can inflate the neck so that you can't play that bit of the neck, and it can say, I insist that you now play an octave higher. get improvising. So this guitar can have a dialogue with you physically about your ability to play it. Anyway, I'm going off on one. How did I get to that point? Oh yes, we were talking about performing interactions. How would we get from scanning with a phone, which is kind of where Carolyn started, to something that feels much more embedded in the practice of making music? Let me wrap up so there's time for some questions. Is there a bigger picture here? If there is, I think it's something to do with guitar as service. And that idea of things being a service, or I suppose more formally, a product service system, of course, is quite widespread, particularly in the manufacturing sector. Rolls-Royce, as I understand it, don't sell you aircraft engines anymore. Don't know when the last time you tried to buy a jet engine was, but if you do go out tomorrow and have a go, then you can't. But what you can buy is a service called Power by the Hour. And as part of that, you lease an engine. But of course, what you're really getting is a whole bunch of software. If you're a computer scientist in the room, we all know that a car is basically an algorithm and a data set on wheels, and the wheels aren't really that important. It's the algorithm and the data set that matter. That's what defines what the car is. And so it's fair to ask the question, what is a guitar? Is it a physical piece of wood and some strings, or is it all the services that come with it? Those services might be new sounds. There is a range of smart guitars where you can now download effects, even into acoustic guitars now, that will play out. So, you know, the services might be sounds and sound processing algorithms. But my argument in this talk is that they might also be identity services. And actually, it's the identities of products, I think, that, you know, matter hugely to people in all sorts of ways. And so that possibly everything on the Internet of Things needs to come with a set of services for managing its identity. I hope some of that made a bit of sense. If you want more info, then the Carolyn blog is the main show in town. That'll give you lots and lots of videos and history. And I'll just leave on screen for a minute a couple of papers about the guitar, art codes, and Soma Design.